Welcome to part 2 of our Cannabis webinar series, Cannabis, New Conversations for Changing Times. We would like to note that today's presentation is provided free of charge and is available in the public domain. Also, the information presented today are the views and opinions of Jamie and Robin and do not reflect the official position of HHS or SAMHSA. Please let us know if you have any questions about the disclaimer. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenters today. Jamie Comstock and Robin Carr founded Info Inspired in 2014. After many years of designing and giving presentations with no formal training in this area and watching their public health colleagues struggle with the same skills gap. Both are certified prevention specialists with 30 years combined experience in the field. They've spent the last several years researching and testing ways to not only capture and hold an audience's attention, but to also inspire audiences. They spent countless hours refining the presentation planning process, identifying free resources, and learning how to maximize the tools they already had, and they've shared their findings with thousands of people across the country. It is also important to know that they aren't graphic designers, artists, or especially tech savvy. Everything they do, you can do too. I will now turn the time over to Jamie and Robin.
Thanks, Taylor, and good morning, everyone. It is so nice to be here with you today. My name is Jamie Comstock, and this is my partner in crime, Robin Carr.
Good morning.
So Taylor mentioned that by day we work in prevention. We're certified prevention specialists. We have been doing prevention work for a long time, decades, each of us. And by night, we are founders of the side gig we call Info Inspired, where we teach people how to develop and design amazing presentations. We do some data trainings and some design trainings, and some of you might have been with us in the past. And if so, hello again. It's nice to have you with us. So we live in Maine. Right now, we're both in Bangor, Maine, and medical marijuana was voted in through Citizen Initiative in 1999, and adult use was voted in 2016, and we had our first stores open in 2020. So for those of you who aren't here at this stage yet, I will tell you that we use the terms adult use or retail market to describe what some people call a recreational market, but we won't use that word recreational to describe that. So we will talk about medical market and an adult use or a retail market. So our stores opened here, like I said, in 2020, and we've been kind of in the space since the beginning of cannabis in Maine. And we mentioned that our side hustle, our Info Inspired things that we do, it's like really communications focused. And the topic of cannabis, we found, is where our communication skills really get tested. So over time, we've developed and designed and given many presentations around the topic of cannabis prevention. And today we're here to share our approach and some of our best tips and tricks with you. So we're going to be with you for 2 hours today, and we'll probably break for somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes, about halfway through, depending on how much time we have. And our goal today is to describe for you and help you better understand the current landscape, the products, the trends, and tools that you can use to help you have effective and confident conversations around cannabis. Okay, Robin, next slide. So just our land acknowledgement here, we want to acknowledge that as we gather in this place, we are occupying the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Wabanaki people, who for thousands of years have called this place home. We acknowledge their continued connection to this land. We give thanks for allowing us to do this good work on their homeland, and remember their ancestors who were here before us. And that was written by Denise Altvader from the Passamaquoddy tribe. All right, next slide. All right. Now I want to put your Mad Chat skills to the test, and I would like you to just drop in the chat box. There are no right or wrong answers. Just what do you feel the average adult cannabis user is? or who do you think the average adult cannabis user is? And where do you think the cannabis industry is headed over the next few years? You guys could drop us a line, let us know what you're seeing. There we go. Woo, look at this. Ding, ding, ding. So we have, wow, we have lots of stuff here. Older adults, teens and young adults, 20 to 30s, all walks, men 45 plus, a couple more older adults, elderly for pain, retirement age individuals, male 40 to 50s, white male 25 to 45, pain patients, anyone. That was a great answer. Continued increase in use, chronic pain. Dude, you guys are totally, you're totally doing this. Awesome. So I think now I'm moving into, where do you think the cannabis industry is headed over the next few years? I see one that says the feds will be taxing it. What else do we have here? Mergers and larger corporations, legal federally for fun, industries expanding and taking over tobacco as well. Adults looking for alternative management of chronic health conditions. Good. Industry headed is to federally legal. Yep, federal. So, yep, multi-billion-dollar industry. These are all such great answers. I see stock purchases. That was interesting. I hadn't thought about that yet. Alignment with alcohol industry and widely normalized use, normalization of use, market regulation. Yeah, good job. Super. Those were some great answers. Okay, so next slide. This is, there's a cannabis tech company called Dutchie, and they recently conducted a study of 5,000 adult cannabis users who were in the US and Canada. And they were looking to get a more accurate understanding of the modern cannabis user. And so what their data revealed is that, contrary to the outdated kind of dazed and confused depiction, today's cannabis consumers are successful, motivated, and health conscious people. More than half of them were female, and 54% were college educated, according to these survey results. Most said they used cannabis to relax and feel calm. And so other like specific things they used it for were sleep and pain relief and stress management. And this group believes cannabis to be less harmful than alcohol and tobacco, and they consider their cannabis use part of their health and wellness routine. And the majority of the respondents reported being physically active and health conscious. All right, next slide. So most of the users in this Dutchie survey were heavy users who used either daily or several times a week, and male users 35 to 44 and female users 45 to 54 used the most. Does that surprise anyone? You can drop it in the chat if you want. I know you can't respond to me verbally. No, yes, no, yes, some, yeah. It's a lot of, yeah, a lot of no's, a lot of no's. This was actually, that was a little surprising to me. I spent a lot of time doing stuff around cannabis, and even that would surprise me a little bit. Okay, next slide. So we're gonna kick off with a look at what's happening in cannabis right now. So those things that I mentioned before, some of the trends, what are the products, like first we're gonna get a good layout of the landscape. And this is one of my favorite parts of my job. It's been so fun from like, you know, Robin and I have this business on the side, this info inspired thing that we do. And so we're like a little bit into entrepreneurial things. We think that's fun because we do have the side gig. And so from that, like, from that angle, this industry, the cannabis industry, is really interesting. I've watched it from the very beginning to where it is now. The range of creativity and innovation never ceases to amaze me. And so sometimes I have to just step back and, and appreciate all of that innovation in a way that, I might not normally. Okay, so next slide. We're going to start our tour of the landscape with the world's largest dispensary. And the world's largest dispensary is in Las Vegas, and it's called Planet 13. So we're going to see if you come with us here. This is a new, there we go. Yep. What's happening? So what you're seeing is the homepage of the Planet 13 Las Vegas webpage. And they've got a drone who's shooting footage through here. I tried to find a bunch of pictures of this, but nothing would allow me to do it better than this. Like, this place is so giant that they have a drone taking pictures of, capturing all of that. Okay, so they've got inside, they have interactive lotus flowers. They have this 18-foot water feature with LED lights and fog that can be seen by the 65,000 hotel rooms that are looking down at this. There's an aerial orb show. There's an LED interactive floor. There's a 3D projection digital experience, and there is some interactive laser art. So it's casino-like, really. This whole, it's experiential. It's like, I don't know, Dave and Buster's and, casino all together. It's crazy. All right, next slide. Good job, Robin. It was masterful handling. So in their own words, their goal is to change the way cannabis is experienced by creating an immersive dispensary and retail facility, making it the largest cannabis dispensary on planet Earth. All right, next slide. Here's an outside shot of that. You can see some of the lotus flowers. They're a little, they're easier to see right there. This reminds me like of a shopping mall. And I actually don't tell them this, but it reminded me of Sears for some reason. Our Sears store is long gone here in Bangor, Maine, but I was thinking you could probably fit like somewhere between 3 and 5 Sears stores in that place for sure. I wasn't, yeah, just so big. All right, next slide. So this is Planet 13 in Santa Ana, California. So what you'll find is that businesses who are successful in one state will replicate their business in another state. And what they're doing is positioning themselves for a time when there will be a national market. So if and when adult use is legalized at the national level, that's what they're doing. So right now, if they want to expand, they have to go to each successive state, learn all the regulations, the rules, the ins and outs, and when, in that state. And then they have to keep doing that because we have no standardization. So Planet 13 is in Santa Ana. And next slide. This is what it looks like inside. And you can see like this one has a different kind of beachy theme, a little like brighter colors. The Volkswagen Vanagon looks a little bit different. And as opposed to a more like sleek kind of urban feel of the Las Vegas location. Okay, next slide. So now I would like you to travel with us to Adelanto, California. Adelanto, California, sorry. And Adelanto is a dry desert town in the Mojave Desert. It's about 45 minutes from San Bernardino, and it's about 2 hours from where I grew up in Bakersfield. And it's a drive-through town. And if you don't know what a drive-through town is, it's a town that you just drive through. You don't want to stop in. And Bakersfield actually used to be a drive-through town. I think it's not so much anymore. But this city, Adelanto, and others like surrounding it in the Mojave Desert right here, they have struggled since 1992 when the George Air Force Base closed. And so to help save the economy, Adelanto first courted the prison industry And now there are 3 different prisons within their city limits, but still their population, 40% of the population lives below the poverty line. So they're really struggling. All right, next slide. So after a planned large-scale solar project didn't pan out, they turned their sights on the cannabis industry to kind of turn its fate around. Next slide. And in fact, they are hoping to become the Silicon Valley of marijuana. So what I want you to take away from this example of Adelanto, California is, this idea that economic revitalization could happen as a result of this industry. Okay, next slide. So here's one of the companies that is located in Adelanto. It's called Weedgenics, and Weedgenics is a 150,000 square foot cultivation and production facility. So a lot of other companies will look to Weedgenics to grow and produce its products so that they can then sell them. So, you contract with Weedgenics to do this work for you. So at this Adelanto facility, they have 80 light rooms, and each light room has 1,100 cannabis plants. And each light room has 2 people tending the plants. They're the bud tenders. So you've got like 160 bud tenders in this building alone. Okay, next slide. And it is not surprising, to me at least, that in Adelanto, at a different facility, this is where the first cannabis workers in Southern California are starting to unionize. So you see how there's a movement to integrate the cannabis industry with broader societal norms. Nearby is Desert Hot Springs, California, and they're working on doing some of the same things. And I would imagine that many other struggling cities and towns across the nation will be looking to the $32 billion cannabis industry to raise up their residents as medical and adult use markets expand. All right, next slide. All right, so now we're heading up the road a piece to Berkeley, California, which is about a 6-hour drive from Adelanto. And this is the Pharmacy Berkeley, and it's focused on educating seniors about the health and wellness benefits of cannabis. And I saw it in the chat, like many of you said, older adults is one of the focus populations. So this building, it's beautiful, and it too was part of a broader kind of block revitalization. It was in a block of buildings that had fallen on kind of hard times, and now the owners came in and breathed some new life into the building. Okay, next slide. So this Pharmacy Berkeley was founded by Sue Taylor. She's the second from the right, the woman in the black outfit. And Sue is in her 70s. She's probably like 76. She used to be a Catholic school principal. She spent her entire retirement and investments from friends and family to create this business because she feels so strongly about her mission to educate seniors and free them from the 15 to 20 medications that many seniors take. And she says, what makes us different at Pharmacy Berkeley is that we have a space where seniors can come and learn about cannabis. It's a place where you can bring your mother. It's a place where you can bring your grandparents. And Sue is one of a handful of female entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry who was featured in a film called Lady Buds. And it followed some female cannabis entrepreneurs in Northern California. And when I was watching that movie, I remembered that a few years ago, there were a bunch of fires up in kind of the Napa area. And I saw this news article, and it talked about how, some of the cannabis farms were destroyed and others were in danger. And at that moment, when I saw that article, that was the first time that it really occurred to me that people's livelihoods depend on this industry. So it's we weren't talking about like some rando like illegal grow out in the middle of, you know, wherever where you have to bootleg water and electricity. Like these are sanctioned businesses where people are making their living, they are feeding their kids, clothing their kids, they're contributing to their communities. And so as we see this industry mature nationally, it's important to just keep the growing complexity of this issue in mind as we do that. Okay, next slide. So what else is Canna happening? And Canna tourism is a huge market that is just taking off. So there was a pre-pandemic study in 2020 that found that 18% of American leisure travelers were interested in cannabis-related experiences on vacation. So that's like 1 in 5, almost 20% of just the general population said, yep, I'd be into that. And then when you controlled further for just people who use cannabis and those who are over 21 and making over $50,000 a year, that number jumped to 62%. So there are a lot of people really interested in cannabis tourism, and we're going to take a look at that a little bit right now. Okay, so first of all, there's a Cannabis Travel Association, and that serves to promote the development of safe and responsible cannabis tourism, to like help with setting some regulations and promoting best practices. They have a really wide range of members. I would encourage you to just take a look at that sometime. Next slide. And those of you who are in Colorado, this will be no shock to you. And I also just wanted to point out that when we're giving examples of things, as you know, you might imagine that there will be a richer and more diverse set of examples to draw on in states where cannabis has been legal for longer. So in Colorado, there's this whole section on their colorado.com webpage. It's like the visitor center dedicated to cannabis hospitality and cannabis travel. So it really legitimates the industry. Next slide. In Modesto, California, they're kind of, visitors center also. They created a passport style reward program, and that helps visitors discover restaurants and businesses and activities that are related to cannabis. And as soon as they rolled out this program, they saw an 11% bump in visits to those businesses. Next slide. Michigan has the Michigan Cannabis Trail. And next slide. Kentucky, even though there is retail cannabis remains illegal, they are still getting in on the action with their official hemp highway that celebrates their CBD only crop. So do you remember when I talked about businesses replicating their models, like from one state to another state to another? Some of the companies are strategically engaging in this cannabis tourism. So one of the country's largest cannabis companies is called True Leaf, and they have a footprint in 11 states, and they are actively like keeping their eye on Florida and plan to, if and when retail adult use is legal in Florida, they plan to site locations in Orlando and Key West and near the Speedway in Daytona. And so their CEO says of Florida, this opportunity will be massive. We have 21 million residents and 130 million tourists. In an adult use market, our business would benefit extremely well. I would say so. All right, next slide. So it all comes back to Planet 13, because this cannabis tourism wouldn't be complete without a nod to a way that you could celebrate your special day with a weed wedding. And I was thinking when I saw this that they shouldn't rely solely on palindrome days, because there's only like, maybe one a year or something, maybe a couple. I don't know. I would have to go and figure that out. But I thought that was pretty interesting. Next slide. So if you're still not sure how normalized cannabis is in our culture, pull out your phone and just type in cannabis, and you'll see dozens and dozens of apps that that are cannabis related. There's this one up here on the right hand side there called Weed Maps, and we use that a lot in our work. Like I said, we have both medical and adult use here in Maine. And I did a little search the other day, and our town that we're in, our city, has a residential population of 30,000 people. And in our city limits, Weed Maps showed me on the map that there were 20 medical and retail establishments where that are cannabis focused and sell cannabis. So that's a pretty high ratio, I would say. All right, next slide. So there are also cannabis focused podcasts, and I listen to these pretty often to just keep up on things and see where trends are going. This one is Canna Insider. That's one of my favorite ones. Next slide. And this one, Professionally Cannabis, it's another one. They're really good too. And note that Professionally Cannabis, it used to just be Professionally Cannabis, and now it's Professionally Cannabis and Professionally Psychedelics. So what this is saying to me, and knowing what I know about the psychedelic market, is that this is the next market to be keeping an eye on also. All right, thanks. So if you're looking for love, there are some cannabis dating apps. There are a lot of them. And so you can just choose whichever subcategory suits you. I don't know, you could do dating apps for people into cannabis and, Shih Tzus or something like that, Dobermans, or, paragliding. I don't know. So I'm going to turn it over to Robin now. That was just a look at the landscape. We're going to look at a landscape of another kind right now with the state landscape.
Thanks, Jamie. My favorite cannabis dating app is called Hi There, and it's spelled H-I-G-H. Hi There. Come on, that's clever. So we did do a little bit of research to learn a little bit more about what's happening in the Mountain Plains region, since this is a training for the Mountain Plains PTTC, understanding that there are folks who are tuning in from all across the country. So kind of our method for gathering this information about what the state legal landscape is and some of the conditions are, we use a couple of different sources that I'll tell you about. And the other thing that I guess is kind of a higher level thing to understand and keep in mind with all of this is that you understand what's happening in one state, you understand what's happening in one state. It's incredibly diverse. And so it is really important as a prevention specialist, we have found, to stay on top of what's happening within your own specific state and really states around, and I'll share a few reasons why, because that will really help you tailor your prevention strategies to what is, kind of within the bounds and what you need to be thinking about, because what might be possible in Colorado, for instance, may not be possible in the state of Maine. So I'm going to rely on some of you to sort of check our facts as we go through this. Some of the sources of information we use, since we're in the Northeast, we're far from the Mountain Plains, to learn a little bit more about what's happening in y'all's region is a website that is called the Marijuana Policy Project, and I wonder if they're going to change their name, but they haven't yet. The Marijuana Policy Project was really, and I think maybe is still behind a lot of the ballot initiatives that have happened. They have financially backed a lot of the ballot initiatives in many of the states, and they did in the state of Maine. And they do keep a pretty good updated list of what's happening state to state, and they have an interactive map. And I do think that there are some states where they've lagged a little bit behind, because I know there's more recent updates to what's happening in Maine than they have on the site. But that's one place that you can look to find out what's happening in your neighbor states or in other areas of the country if you're not sure what's going on. You can also look at the Smart Approaches to Marijuana Policy website. They have a section where they do updates on different ballot initiatives and things. And so we just did a quick compilation of the medical and adult use legalization landscape, criminalization. Also, if there's some sort of legalized cannabis, who the governing bodies for that would be state to state, and also the price per ounce. So the price per ounce we got from a website called priceofweed.com, which is sort of a crowdsourced data website, and where people will tell you how much they spent on the cannabis that they just purchased. So you can also see on that website how many people have uploaded that information. So in the state of Colorado, it's, 10 or 15,000 people have uploaded information into priceofweed.com. So you can just get a sense of how reliable that information might be. So in Montana, from what we can see from where we are far away, is that you do have an adult use program, and it's legal to those 21 plus. You have a retail sales market. There are some places where adult use is legal, but there isn't a retail sales market attached. Medical use is legal, and the governing body is the Montana Department of Revenue. And it's great to know who the governing body is, because that's a place that you can go to get a lot of data to learn about what's happening as this whole thing evolves. Let's see, go there. And in case you're wondering what an ounce of cannabis is, and my point of reference from always has been like, what is a dime bag? That's kind of like where my understanding began and ended. And Jamie and I had a long conversation about dime bags the other day, and palindrome weddings and such. But an ounce is like a full zip top bag, and depending on who you talk to and how it's done, that's kind of give or take 100 joints. So that's what an ounce is, to put that in context for you as we give this price per ounce. So going through the rest of the Mountain Plains states, Wyoming, adult use is illegal, medical use is illegal, and possession is criminalized. And kind of looking around at some of the prevention resources, you can definitely see that there are a lot of, the prevention messaging is very geared toward this being the case in the state of Wyoming. And the price per ounce there is $315.33. And so if anyone lives in these states and knows different information or more information, I'd really welcome you to put that in the chat and update us about what's going on. Sometimes ballot and bill tracking and stuff is a little bit more challenging to find out. So Colorado, I mean, if you're doing prevention work in Colorado, you are our teachers. You've been doing this work a really long time. So I think most of us know what's happening in Colorado, sort of the bigger level policy things, that they've had the longest standing adult use retail sales market in the country. Their medical, they have medical use. Their governing body is the Colorado Department of Revenue Marijuana Enforcement Division. Their data collection is incredibly robust. More recent things that I think have been put into place, or at least have been voted on, are places in hotels and restaurants where people can consume, retail shops that have places for on-site use, some things in the way of being able to invest in stocks for publicly traded companies. So Colorado continues to be sort of on the forefront of these policy moves to I guess legitimizing this as a legal industry. In Utah, adult use is illegal, medical use is legal, possession is still criminalized there. And there's sort of a split when it comes to the governing body, because you've got the Utah Department of Health, who's overseeing the program, but the Department of Agriculture and Food oversees cultivation and food processing. And that was kind of what was originally devised here in Maine, and they moved away from that kind of early on. And I can see that causing, some challenges. And the price per ounce there is $280.19. In North Dakota, so from what I see from afar, it looks like probably things are white hot in North Dakota right now, where you have an adult use legalization question on your November ballot. So there's probably a lot of messaging, inundated messaging in the state of North Dakota, where medical use is also legal. And there is a retail sales market being proposed in the state. Possession is decriminalized, and the governing body currently for the medical program is the North Dakota Department of Health Division of Medical Marijuana. And you can see the price per ounce is pretty high there, $382.17. And the price of weed.com also gives sort of like the low quality, medium quality, high quality. So we gave the price for the highest quality price per ounce in this particular example. South Dakota, medical use is legal, and it looks to me like it may not have been decided yet whether or not an adult use question is going to be on the November ballot in South Dakota, because there was it looks from me, from what I see from afar, is that originally an adult use question, adult use was approved, and then it was overturned by the court system, and now there's a movement to get this back on the November ballot, and there have been signatures that have been submitted, and those signatures are at this time being validated, or they were in the month of May, so this may be on the ballot. And it's a place where possession is decriminalized, and the governing body for the medical program is the South Dakota Department of Health. And you've got the price per ounce, and you will get this slide deck, so you'll have this. So that is just sort of, we're setting the stage, and an example of how you could do that on your own stage setting, kind of a look at the industry, a look at what's happening at different states, and we're going to go even further with this. But what is a prevention specialist to do? It seems quite overwhelming. So has anybody seen this before? You know what this is? Anyone? You can type it in the chat. The spiff. Yeah. Indeed, the spiff. Indeed, the spiff. Jamie told me this is a chocolate pie. Has anyone heard it called that? A, and then the first letter, a chocolate pie. I thought that was really cute. That comes by way of a prevention specialist from the state of Maine. I don't know if it was hers originally, Cheryl Tchaikovsky. So we're going to give her credit for the chocolate pie. Yeah. Oh, okay, Darcy, thank you. It has been validated. Apple crisp pie. Hi, Nicole Hackley. Okay, so I'm trying to go up in the chat as people are typing in. It's been validated as of last week for South Dakota and will be on the ballot. Thank you, Darcy. Okay. Great. Apple crumb pie or a chocolate pie. All right, good deal. So we decided there are probably a lot of ways that you can ground yourself in figuring out what your next steps are. But we thought that this would probably be, this for us is a nice way to approach it. And it's a concept we're familiar with. And you really, if you are working the elements of the spiff, it can be incredibly helpful to you to do effective prevention work in the cannabis space, understanding that it's just things are moving so quickly all the time. So now if you could type into the chat, since many of you are engaged in this cannabis prevention work currently and probably have been for many years, we're going to go through the steps of this spiff, and so we're going to stop in each of the spots to get input from you, but we're really interested to know what kinds of data you are including in your assessment when you're trying to paint your picture of what's going on in your community or your state relative to cannabis. What kind of data are you looking at and monitoring, and what are the sources for some of that information? And the picture that you have here is an example of something that's going on here in our community. This is a co-location of businesses that just happened a couple of weeks ago. We have a cannabis shop, and then right beside it, there has been a little takeout restaurant open that's called Shakes and Bakes Takeout, and that has been hopping. It's been so busy over there. I keep trying to get a picture without a whole bunch of cars and people out front, and I cannot do it because it's just been so crazy busy over there. So type in the chat if you would. What are you looking at for data when you're working on your assessment, and what are the sources of that information? And it could be quantitative from a survey, youth survey, 30-day use from your youth survey, your SHARP survey, youth inpatient treatment, focus groups and interviews with youth, parents, and adults, juvenile arrest, perception of harm from the youth perspective, from the YRBS. Good. Other ideas? Give me just a second. SHARP survey. Okay. Youth survey, ID checking, park outreach, high THC use, Yeah, that's really interesting, Audrey. I think we're talking a lot about that here in Maine, how to get a better understanding of um, not just reported use, but if there are people who are reporting more use of higher THC products. So these are all great things and all things that we include when we're trying to paint the picture of what's happening in our community. And what we did is we put together a handout for you that is a list of where the types of information that we use in our assessment and also the potential sources of that information. And the takeaway for that really is that we're a bit trained to always look toward the like youth survey and adult survey data, core measures, and that's really important. But also we should be building in some other and often industry specific sources of data. So for instance, if you want to know, if you want in the state of Maine, if you want to know a true accounting of all of the outlets for retail and medical establishments, the best place to get that information is Weed Maps, the app. So because of different privacy protections with our medical caregiver storefront operations, there's no public list available anywhere. So if you as a prevention specialist want to know how many places there are to buy cannabis in your community, Weed Maps is probably the best, most accurate place to get that information. I also mentioned we use this website called priceofweed.com to find out how much things cost. And having understanding of the price of products, if you have products for sale in your community, can be really important too, because we know especially youth are very price sensitive. So it's good to know how much that package of gummies is being sold for in the store. And you can find that out by going to the website of the different places that are selling those products. And then also, don't be afraid to go out into the community. I say that from a place of relative safety because we have two other prevention specialists who work in our office who they were team A, and they went out and they did a bunch of visits to cannabis retailers, both adult use and medical. And then Jamie and I are team B, so we're not doing our visits until the end of June. But boy, does that give you really rich information when you go out into the field, into the community, and go into some of these places. And what our A team, who's awesome, found is that people really want to, the people who are working in the shops, they really are very willing to talk to you most times. You can get really firsthand look at the types of products that are being sold, the point of sale messages and advertising that are around, their kind of understanding of what their needs are. And, you know, they did some assessment questions asking them if they'd be interested in any kind of training, any kind of education partnerships that you could have. So that's really beneficial to do that work of going out and visiting these places. Also, it's great to have an understanding of what's happening in other states and be tracking different consumption patterns, contributing factors and consequences for your neighbor states or other states. And not just to find things that you might need to worry about or have caution about, but also you might find that a state seems to be doing really well in a certain area. So for example, if you're looking at childhood poisonings, there might be a state where there are far fewer childhood poisonings and they have an adult use market. So what might they be doing well there that your state can look to replicate to reduce those kinds of problems? Also, another thing to be looking at is the money. How is this taxed? Where is the tax revenue headed? It is not a foregone conclusion that prevention is going to get any of that money. Like in the state of Maine right now, there are still current discussions about whether or not any of that money will be able to come back to the field of prevention, because currently it doesn't. And that can really be a helpful thing to understand, especially if you're trying to do not just an assessment of what your needs are, but what your resources are. So you can feel free to add to that list. You've got it in the chat, and it's kind of a working list, but that's just something to give you a little bit of inspiration and get you started, to get you thinking about their assessment. As we mentioned earlier, it's good to know who the governing bodies for the adult use and medical programs are in the states, because if you go to those websites, a lot of them have open source data available. And I think it's really especially important to understand how much is being sold, how much of this is out in our community. And the Colorado Department of Revenue has really detailed information that goes way back, sales by year, sales by month. The state of Maine is also doing that. And I was just like stunned to see that for the month of May, we had, for our small state with our very small population, last month we had almost $12 million in just adult use sales for that 1 month. Every month it's been like, Jamie's checked in a few times and said, so is this like for total? Is this like a running total? And I was like, no, let me double check, but I think it is just for this month. So just having understanding of the amount that's being sold and out in the community, that access and availability is great. Another thing you can look at too is alcohol consumption. So for a long time, we've talked about like what will happen with alcohol consumption with the normalization and legalization of cannabis products. And we know that there's been an argument out there that if you legalize these cannabis products, we're going to see our alcohol use rates go way down. So have a look at that, see what's happening in your state and the other states where there are these legal avenues to cannabis, is what's happening with alcohol consumption. So I'm going to turn things back over to Jamie now, who's going to talk about a different type of assessment.
Thanks, Robin. So this is an ad that popped up in one of my feeds. And, we talked about earlier the profile that the Dutch Use survey said, like, these are the people who are using. And for women, it was women between the ages of 45 and 54 with a certain level of education and health conscious. And guess what? I fit that profile. So this comes up in my feed. And we've compared around the office also. We all get different kind of social media ads. Robin has shared stuff that her 21-year-old daughter has received. And so this is one avenue of detection that you can find also. So it's your own. You can ask your friends, you can look at your own social media pages, and I guarantee you, as this industry matures, you will find more coming your way. Next slide. So we're gonna look at some of the products that are on the market right now. Generally speaking, usable marijuana or flower, that's the dry stuff you roll in a paper and smoke or put in a pipe, that continues to have the biggest market share. So we're selling more of that than anything else. But infused products, and those are things that you might know of as edibles, they're called infused products, are the fastest growing segment of the cannabis market. So with these products, there's a real focus on discreetness, and in a lot of ways, a real push to move pharma out of the way. So to replace medications with like simpler, more natural things. And if you remember back to when we were looking at Pharmacy Berkeley and Sue Taylor and her mission to get the seniors off of the array of pharmaceuticals that they were on, this is where the industry is going. And so these are 1906 drops, and they are little pills, and most are 5 milligrams, and they are some of the fastest acting edibles on the market. These, I don't know if you guys remember those Choose Your Adventure books, but this is what the Choose Your Adventure book is, what these 1906 drops remind me of. So some of the things that you see here, Genius. So if you want to feel smarter, you take some Genius. If you want to go to sleep, you take the Midnight. If you want more energy, you take Go. If you want to feel amorous, you take Love. There's also Bliss, so feeling happy, and Chill. That's just relaxing. So you take one of these little pills and you're on your way. So this is from their website. The cannabis pills come in discreet packaging. Oh, someone says essential oils. Yes, you're right. It does. It does remind me of that. So they come in discreet packaging that fits right in your pocket. Each container is color coded, as are the drops inside, so you can tell at a glance which one you're reaching for. 1906 drops are dairy, sugar, and gluten-free. Each 0-calorie drop is pharma grade, safe, and effective. I also see that mimicking homeopathics. Yes, you're right. That's so hard to say. So yeah, you're right. You're right about all those things. I want to point out the dairy, sugar, gluten-free, and 0 calories. So I can tell you, I know exactly how many calories are in a glass of wine, red wine, and it's like 120 for a 5-ounce glass. And as we women get older, we have to make decisions about our calorie budgets, right? And where we want to spend our calories. And so these products are speaking directly to me, right? Because I have to tell you, like, sometimes I don't want to, not that I drink wine all the time or anything. I don't want to give you that impression, but I'm just saying that these are things that we really have to consider. Okay, next slide. Is it moving? Oh, good. The other thing that's really happening with these products is that we're moving to, like I mentioned, discrete products. And so what is recently emerged are some sprays, and this is one of those. And also some things that you could take sublingually. So we'll show that in the next slide. But the reason is that they're very discreet. They don't smell like anything. And you also bypass entirely the digestive system. So the uptake is really quick. So you can feel the effects pretty quickly. I don't know this, but I would imagine it is something like you would feel the effects of alcohol. Sometimes you can feel that pretty quickly. If you haven't had a drink in a while, or if you have a particularly strong drink, it might be sort of similar to that. Okay, next slide. Here's some different candy that I found, and these are like pop rocks. So THC infused pop rocks are here. And next slide. These are called Kikoko Little Helpers. And for those of you who are old enough or know some drug history, you may know that Valium was originally marketed as Mother's Little Helper. So it was marketed by pharma as something that could help an overstressed mom or woman. And lots and lots and lots of moms were prescribed Valium, mine included. And it was prescribed in a way to reduce the stress so that women could handle their lives. And the Rolling Stones did a song in 1966 called Mother's Little Helper. And I listened to that song the other day, and those lyrics in 1966 are very appropriate still to today, 50 years later. We're still experiencing the same issues. So my sister, she's a primary care doctor, and she said that she's got like a 60-40 split in her practice. So 60% are men and 40% are female. And she said it is so common that women will come in and say, oh my God, I'm so stressed out. I don't know how I'm going to take care of all of these things. Like, the stress is really getting to me. She said she never, ever hears that from men. And we know that COVID has increased that burden for women in particular. And so I just think it's really interesting that instead of providing structural solutions to get to the root of the cause for women, we're just really still okay with, oh, here, take this Kikoko Little Helper and we can erase your symptom. So yeah. Okay, next slide. So now we have another thing that's really interesting about this. Do you see how I waver between this really makes me mad and ooh, this is really cool? So here I am at this is really cool. And they have like a ton of high, like, there's concentration on profile and high-end taste profile, high-end products with like kumquat and pomegranate and, really interesting kind of flavors, unique things, exotic that you wouldn't normally see. So here are some macarons. And next slide. These are like a 7-pack of little rolled joints. You see that they're sold out. But I thought like that would be something I could imagine someone just putting in their pocket and taking into a club or something. Okay, next slide. Here is some high-end wine. And I don't know if you know this, but in order to put THC in wine, you must first remove the alcohol. So they make the wine, they take all the alcohol out, then they put THC into the alcohol. All right, next slide. And for those of you who don't do high end, we have regular old working class kind of infused beer. This is a Maine beer. It's like everyone knows about Shipyard. And so they are on the bandwagon and they have created this THC infused beer for the enjoyment of all. Okay, next slide. And this is not a product, but it's a delivery device. So this is a one hitter. So you would put, I don't even know exactly how you would use it, to tell you the honest to God truth, but it's cute. And my daughter would love that. Do they have to? Yes, they have to take the alcohol out of the beer first. Yep, they have to do that. Anytime you have, it's my understanding that if you have an alcoholic beverage, you take the alcohol out and then put the THC in. And people talk about how it's like a much mellower ride, I guess is how I would say it. And these are things that I hear on these podcasts that I listen to. So there's like, you can get way in the weeds anywhere you want. And you can learn about banking, you can learn about all sorts of stuff. Okay, next slide. All right, so this isn't a THC product, but I thought that we should put this in here just to show you that, I mean, you probably are aware of the range of CBD that is in all sorts of products. You almost have to look hard not to find something with CBD in it these days. So here's some face cream. And next slide. We've got some dog biscuits. I know I had a friend who was giving her dog some CBD. And next slide. This is our favorite one of all time. We have had so many giggles about the Miss Buds CBD vaginal cream in our office. And I think Robin found something similar to this at TJ Maxx one day. And she came back and she was like, you are not going to believe this. We don't really know what, I don't know why you would use this. Oh, deodorization. A small amount can go a long way. I've smelled a lot of weed and it doesn't really deodorize, I don't think. I mean, that's why they call it skunk bud. But, maybe, who knows? Who knows? All right, so that is, we're gonna tie up kind of the product look at that. And then I think, Robin, would you like to take a little break right now?
Yeah, this is a perfect break time. I'll get all my giggles out about Miss Buds.
How many minutes would you like to take? You want to take 10?
Yeah.
All right. How about you all come back at 10 after the hour? I think that would be 11:10 Mountain Time. I will put it in the chat. All right. Do you want to use thumbs up? Okay. So we're going to get started again. And I wanted to let you know that Robin answered a couple of questions that people had in the chat. I put in a link to the article that talks about the Dutchy study from the beginning of the training that we talked about, the men 34 to 45, women 45 to 54, or something like that. So that's in there if you need it. I'm also looking at CBD suppositories. Wow. And then someone asked, Kathy asked if there are overdose risks for cannabis products. And the answer to that is there are not fatal overdoses in the way that we think about, fentanyl in the heroin supply. But people can. What often happens is that people expect, especially when they eat an edible or an infused product, that they will feel the effects. And when they don't, sometimes they take more and they keep taking that. This happens often with new users and also products that have to be digested so that they go through the entire digestive system versus those products that can be absorbed straight into your bloodstream, like the sprays or the sublinguals. And so what happens is that people end up with a whole bunch of THC on board and they're not used to it, or maybe they are used to it, but it's still way too much. This can also happen with some of the highly concentrated products, so like hash oil. And so people, also kids who accidentally get a hold of their folk stash of infused products. And what typically happens is that it's a really uncomfortable period of time. People feel lots of anxiety, heart racing. So there are risks, but there aren't fatal kind of overdoses associated with overconsumption. All right. Okay. I'm going to turn it back over to Robin, and we're going to talk about the C in your chocolate pie. Maybe it's a crisp. Maybe it's caramel.
Or caramel. And I was looking up on the break. I went down the rabbit hole of Utah. I just Googled Utah and marijuana for mothers, Amber, and others. And I don't know if I found the right article, but I did find like the first thing that came up. I'm going to try to put it so you can see it in my screen. It's a Happy Mother's Day thing, and it's an ode to inspiring mothers. And I what it looks like is it looks like a cannabis company, Wholesome Co. Cannabis, teamed up with Utah Therapeutic Health Center, and they did this whole Mother's Day thing. Tell us about your mom and why this mom in your life is so deserving and she should treat herself and she should take care of herself with cannabis. So yeah, that is kind of the new where this is going. And to kind of tie up the assessment section, it really is so vital to have an understanding of kind of what's happening at the highest level, and then also have that hyper local look, because if you are gearing your prevention strategies to this kind of dazed and confused idea of who uses cannabis and for what reasons, to get as high as possible, and it's this demographic and this age group and these are their concerns, when it's really a totally different population, your prevention strategies are just going to totally miss the mark. So our next stop, as Jamie said, is the caramel crumb cake, caramel crumb pie capacity building. So once you start to figure out what's happening in your community, the next stop is figuring out who's gonna do this work alongside us, this prevention work, because we know we do nothing alone. So if you want to just take a minute in the chat, if you would type in, who are you working with these issues with in your community? Like, who are the sectors, the partners that have made a lot of sense for you to have do coalition work with and work on cannabis prevention stuff? Are there particular sectors that you've had success working with? schools. Thank you, Ashley. And one of the things we found about working with our schools have been tremendous partners of ours. And while they were really reticent to take any political position on any ballot initiatives, they were very much ready to engage in conversations about what they thought the impacts of greater access and availability might be on students at school and what their considerations as schools and administrators might be. We have also coming into the chat, city commissioners, city council, community members, school personnel. Yeah, thank you, William. Education system, they're experiencing a lot of vaping problems, so they can tell the story of what's happening within the school communities and be great allies on our team. And then also type into the chat, if you would, next. So we've got the groups, the people who we have as allies who can work in partnership with us. And then what are the resources that you have at your disposal to be able to do some of this work? If you have some specific resources you're using, type those in the chat. Cannabis supportive advocacy groups, city councils, volunteer groups. What resources do you have? And if that's too obtuse a question, I apologize. And we will share some resources. Community groups, churches, grassroots organizations. Yeah, these are all great examples of who you can partner with. And I really appreciate the person that had, Operation Parent. Yeah, that's a cool resource. Coalitions is a great resource. Technology. Yes. So these are some great examples. And so what we're beginning to understand too is that people who own and operate cannabis businesses can and also probably should be our partners in this work too. And as I mentioned, we've already had some good luck in their willingness to participate with us. Oh, Army National Guard, great. Health classes, all good stuff. So we're going to take you through, you came up with this list and much more of who you can work with. So we're going to take you through just a few ideas of where you can look for other resources aside from the partners that you might have in the community. I remember when we started out doing cannabis prevention work, we were kind of an early legalization state, and it was really before we had any resources whatsoever. So it was back in the time where we had the original SPIF SIG grant, for anybody who knows about that, and that was all geared toward alcohol prevention. Any other sources of funding that we had, we were really only allowed with our prevention funding to even spend our time working on alcohol. It was before, and so were our state partners. So our state substance use prevention organizing agency, they too had funding restrictions. It was before the advent of the Prevention Technology Transfer Center. It was before we had a lot of trainings that we could engage in this way. So it was really like a resource, like desert. There wasn't much available out there. And now I would say we have the opposite, and that's great in a lot of ways. So we're going to talk about how to deal with that. So if you go from state to state, for example, you can see Wyoming has, we thought this was kind of cute because we live in Maine and our state abbreviation is me. So there's so much like prevention for me or talk to me about it. And so Wyoming has their own kind of spin on that, the why we talk. So we thought that was kind of cute. And we haven't looked at any of these deeply, but it's just a great place. This is just to give you an idea that it's a great place to kind of look at your state and see what resources have been created that you can use for free in many instances that are available to you in your state or other states. There's just so much out there. And then, of course, the Prevention Technology Transfer Centers, and each of the Prevention Technology Transfer Centers has specialty areas of focus, I believe. And in New England, we are PTTC in New England. Their specific area of expertise is cannabis, and they have put together a lot of robust resources for prevention specialists. They have education and toolkits. They pull together lots of resources. The Mountain Plains Technology Transfer Center has pulled together a whole lot of resources for this topic as well. And you can just go on the PTTC websites and connect to all of those. And again, you're going to get this slide deck and all of that, so you'll be able to find these later on. Many times people will ask us about youth education, and if you're not aware about the Cannabis Awareness and Prevention Toolkit, this is something that we really like and share with educators. So we talk about a couple of things with youth education. Sometimes people want the specific cannabis youth education, and that's great. And then we also sort of reinforce, like, prevention is prevention is prevention. So life skills and social emotional learning curriculum and all that really base substance use prevention stuff, yes, works for cannabis too. But if you're looking for cannabis specific, this is a pretty good resource. And then if you're a state that has a lot of messaging happening around what will happen if you have an adult use market, if you have messaging that you need to do against that sort of thing. We love Sue Thaw, she's from Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. Their lobbyist, their policy consultant, and if you have ever seen her, she is, very petite, but has the power of a nuclear reactor. And she does a great job with her presentations of boiling things down to their simplest message, which I think is something we really struggle with in prevention. So even if your specific state issues don't totally align with the messages she's created, you can get a lot of inspiration about how to message in a way that's really concise, really effective, really powerful. And sometimes I'm talking with my hands and then I have a hard time advancing my screen quickly. Sorry about that, folks. Smart approaches to marijuana, we mentioned it early on as a place where you can get information about policy and do bill tracking across the country, but they also have tons of different fact sheets. We really relied heavily on smart approaches to marijuana in our early days. And a lot of what we liked about them is that it's really common sense messaging. It is not reefer madness. And we hope what you're getting out of this session is that if we go in with this reefer madness, the sky is falling, this is the worst thing ever message, that it's really tone deaf during this time where most people think that this is a product that should be legal, and we have these massive industries being built and a lot of people's livelihoods depending on this. And so this more common sense messaging, these ideas that everybody can kind of get behind that feel like they would resonate, this is great for that sort of thing. So you'll have these, you have your state resources, national resources, technical systems resources, and also look around at what your fellow coalition partners are doing, because we are all doing really phenomenal work. And this is an example of a main coalition that we wanted to highlight, Healthy Androscoggin, who did a great project where they did a survey and they spoke with pregnant and breastfeeding people, and they also spoke with healthcare providers and social service providers who interacted with them. And what they found was that people who are pregnant and breastfeeding are very open to having their healthcare providers and their social service providers talk with them about cannabis use. And conversely, they found that healthcare providers and social service providers were really uncomfortable doing that. So what they did with that information is they created this resource toolkit for healthcare providers and social service providers that was informed by what pregnant and breastfeeding people had to say about what their concerns were, what their interests were, what they were willing to have conversations about. And then they did some training around these resources, which they've made available to everybody for free, which is great. And what we would say, because this is a resource-rich environment, which is a wonderful thing, are that you want to kind of just look at it through this lens of how do you vet all of this information that you're looking at when you're going online and you're reading messages and looking at materials. You want to understand who benefits, if anyone? Is someone trying to sell a product and that's kind of the slant of their messaging? Always being careful to be sure you can put any data that you have in a context. And an example I would give of that is when you start talking about childhood exposures of cannabis in people, in kids 0 to 5 increased 10,000% or something, or 500%. Being able to say what that actual number is. So it went from this number to this number, so people can have that real idea. Because if you don't do that, what happens is people kind of view you as being someone who would sensationalize information and kind of use the data to twist it in a way that seems advantageous. So we really early on learned it was really important to say, yes, we've seen this tremendous amount of increase in these states who have an adult use cannabis market, but these are the numbers. So it's a 500% increase, and these are the numbers, because that really just helps to further our credibility with our partners that we're working with. Also, knowing the source of all the information, and that's one wonderful thing about the work that's been put together by the Prevention Technology Transfer Centers. Everything is meticulously footnoted. You don't have to do that work yourself and spend that time doing it. And that's just a huge advantage to us in our work. And then also keeping in mind when you start to share these messages, share this stuff, being able to anticipate what the counterpoints are, what people are going to have to say in response. And you can practice doing some of that with people, like talk to your family about it, say some things you're thinking about talking with the school board about or the city council about, and see what kind of things naturally come out in those conversations. But being able to be skilled in understanding what the counterpoints might be, because there are a lot of counterpoints out there, can just help you be able to have conversations more confidently and be more effective. Also, we, in our other trainings, if you've been to any of our other trainings, we talk a whole lot about cognitive overload and not inundating people with information. We have no shortage of information about cannabis, its health effects, impacts. There's so much data out there, and it's really important for us to have. But we really need to manage that and think about what is the most vital information to share with the particular audience that I am speaking with. And it's probably going to vary from audience to audience. And also keep in mind that what's important to you might not be important to that audience member, and that's okay. But it's just that process we want you to be going through, thinking about like what's important for me to know and have for background information, and then what might be important to share. I mentioned cognitive overload. The other thing that you likely have available to you are some presentations that are done for you already. And we have some thoughts about those, and they definitely have an important purpose, and we're very glad that they exist. And for example, the New England Prevention Technology Transfer Center has some great slide decks with very detailed information in them. There's one on cannabis pharmacokinetics, and it talks all about how THC impacts on the body, where it's stored in the body. Such great information for us to have. But what we would ask folks to do is really be thoughtful about how you might want to use that information. And for me, that's more of a back of the house information. And I'm going to give you an example of that. So here is a slide from that slide deck on cannabis pharmacokinetics. And this is going in detail about how long THC stays in the body, where it's stored, and it's, again, meticulously footnoted. And for us to have that background is vital, because people are always going to ask, how do you know that? Where did that come from? What is the actual science you have to back up what you're telling me? So we need to have that. But this is not what I'm going to take to the school board meeting. Instead, I'm going to take this as my background information, and I might use it to do a slide or ask a question like this, what organs in the human body store the most THC? So it's a little bit more engaging to the elephant, if you're familiar with that concept from our other trainings. So it's all about learning how to go through the resources that you have and be really discerning about how much you share and how you share it. And don't just take for granted that something's been done for you and you can just kind of pass it off without spending the time to do that vetting. And I'm going to turn things back over to Jamie to talk about planning.
All right, thank you. So our next step is planning, and that is about how you make a solid plan. So let's just say, for instance, that your town council is talking about allowing retail shops in your town. So what is your next step? Like, what do you say to them, and how do you figure out what you say to them? Pop that in the chat. How do you figure out what you're going to say to them, what the salient points of your message is? How do you do this? Any ideas and thoughts? Oh, good. Kyle says, do some research on the individual and find a connection to their passions and our work. Yeah, great answer. Anyone else? Good. Not the marijuana from years ago. It's stronger. Other ideas? All right. So thanks. Next slide, Robin. You guys are right on. So make sure to have the statistics on the use, the safety, etc. of marijuana. So yeah, so you guys are all on it. I hope data-backed research will be pursued for appropriate application. So this is about what we call building audience avatars. And it is those things that you all were just talking about. So the planning begins with knowing your audience. You can find information about audiences in a lot of places. So social media, for all of its positives and negatives, a lot of people post their viewpoints and beliefs, and so you can get a pretty decent handle about what people think about things. Officials post often about things that matter to them and what their priorities are. And what we found in this age of COVID was actually kind of cool. So all of these meetings that we used to go to live, and we used to not be able to attend some meetings because they were too far away or there was a conflict. And now with remote meetings and meetings being recorded kind of as a matter of, happening very regularly, there's so much data that you have access to as a result of all of that. So you can watch government meetings, you can watch school board meetings, you can look at agendas, you can figure out how people interact with each other. So that's where you want your planning to begin. All right, next slide. So we call this built around the audience, and we do all of our audience homework so we can better plan what our messages are. We make sure that the audience and their interests are at the heart of every decision, and make sure of that when we're planning a presentation or a handout or a conversation. And it helps us tailor that content so it speaks to them personally and it connects with what they care about, which is what you all were talking about in the chat. So we didn't always do it like this. Next slide. We had some massive failures by not properly planning. And so what we're sharing with you today is just kind of some of the stuff we've learned over time. I'll tell you about the time we went to a meeting in a town called Dexter, and Dexter was looking at, the town council was looking at whether or not to allow retail cannabis shops, whether they were going to opt in. And so Dexter is a lot like Adelanto, California, in that it has struggled financially over the years. It was a lot of Maine towns are former mill towns or factory towns. We had a booming shoe factory industry. We had booming mill industries, and most, if not all, I think there might be one or two left when there used to be hundreds, are gone. And Dexter had a shoe factory, and that is gone, and they are pretty financially troubled. So they've had these hard times ever since the shoe factory closed. So we're invited to this town meeting by one of the town councilors, and we, who was really prevention focused. She was very prevention focused. So we head in and we're like ready to talk about brain development and graduation rates. And the audience, the residents, they want to talk about economic development. And so to say we were uncomfortable was like putting it really mildly. It was like, I still can feel that in the pit of my stomach. That was, I never want to be there again. But looking back, as Robin and I talked about it, we realized that everyone was there talking about how to protect and care for kids. So we wanted to protect kids from youth substance use, and we wanted to make sure that their futures were, protected. And the proponents, the folks who wanted to have those retail stores, they were showing that they cared about kids by thinking about how can we bolster our economy and provide jobs for parents, right? So it was two ways to get at the very same thing. In other meetings, just some things to be aware of as you go down this road of maybe doing this more often. And we've seen a lot of city councilors who are also business owners, and they get worried about the perception that they might block another type of business that could be a competitor. So they have this heightened, like, what does this look like lens? Like, if I act in this way, what are people going to think? So he didn't want to make rules for marijuana when he sold alcohol. And other things that you can glean from all of these meetings. One time we had a city councilor, a different city councilor, who was really like aligned with prevention. But the problem was the rest of the council did not like this person. And so when anything he said, like, they just wouldn't listen to him. He could say, the sky is blue and, oceans are full of water. And they would say, we don't believe you and we don't align with what you're saying. And so when you're heading into these meetings, these are things to look at. Who can I align with? Read the energy of the room and of the meetings. And the more information you have about each counselor or select person or whatever you call them where you are, the better. And, it's even better if you can get some information about understanding their relationship to each other. All right, next slide. And I see Rory put in, Rory asked us if we can leave like 10 minutes at the end. Yes, we're trying to do that. So you have a couple of handouts. This is one of them. We call this building your audience avatar. And so answering the questions in these handouts will help you drill down to specific audience characteristics and help you identify what they want to see from your presentation or your communication or your handout, whatever. So going through this handout and answering those questions is going to give you some really valuable information. And this will help you build your presentation around your audience. Okay, next slide. This is a fun little worksheet too, not a worksheet, but information sheet. This is about figuring out where the gaps are and then figuring out how to fill them. So, we have knowledge gaps where we don't know about something and we need more information. We have skills gaps where we don't have the skills to do something. And so we have to learn those skills. A motivation or an attitude gap is where we're really not motivated to do something. We just can't get there. We don't know why the change is needed. An environment gap might be when you are being asked to do something, but the things that you can choose from in your environment aren't as available as you think. Well, I'll give you an example of this. And a communication gap when you just have conflicting communication. So when we started our work in this, we really approached everything through a knowledge gap lens. We were like pounding people with all this knowledge, like learn this, brain development, statistics, like all this stuff. And what we found mostly is that our audience had like either motivation gaps or environment gaps. Like they didn't see why the change was needed. They didn't really have any interest in doing that. But for others, it was an environment gap. And when we're providing knowledge and they have this gap, we're not providing what they need. So an example of an environment gap is this. In a lot of our meetings with towns and municipalities, a lot of the way to regulate cannabis related businesses is through land use. So you're using, I think it's, we'll talk about this in just a second, but you're using land use approaches. So you're locating, asking people to locate in certain, restricting the zone location. You're restricting maybe size of store or lighting or buffers, something like that. And so we would walk into meetings and say, like, here's your list of things that you could do to regulate from a land use perspective. And those town councils would go back to their city attorney. City attorneys are really, they don't want to be sued. They don't want even a threat of a lawsuit. It's very costly for cities to have lawsuits. We work for a city, so we know that. And so very often what would happen is that that select board or the town council would come back to us and they would say, these 3 options are off the table because the city attorney said no. So that's an environment gap where you're asking, hey, look at, consider these things. Another really interesting kind of thing that I realized is that municipalities here in Maine are they're legally able to restrict the number of adult use licenses that are in the municipality, but they instead, mostly I've found, try to regulate via land use. And that's because if they say we can have 3, we only want 3 businesses within our town limit, then they have to develop a process to choose the 3 businesses. And so they don't want the threat again of this, process that might be perceived to be unfair. And so we're seeing more people restrict via land use. I'm gonna, next slide. I'm not gonna talk about this, Robin, because I don't want to run out of time. So I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Thank you. So, we, as you go through that process of your planning, that's where you could do that slide before was just a reminder of doing some logic modeling there. That's kind of where that is going, building out your logic model in that part of the process. So we were well trained by the National Coalition Academy, and we are doing our logic models. So I love the comment that Philip put in the chat about don't try to pass on all your knowledge in one presentation. Start with questions and ask more all the way through. Keep your audience engaged. Yes, should be a two-way exchange of information, and we should be doing a lot of the listening in our initial conversations. Thank you very much. So moving into the next phase, our next question for you is around implementation. So we're interested in what strategies you're all working on related to cannabis prevention in your community. So what are you doing right now? Is it youth education? Is it working on policy issues in workplaces or schools? Is it at, you're working at the policy level at the town and the state level? Type in the chat what you're working on for implementation strategies for cannabis prevention. If you would, thank you. Positive social norming among youth, work in schools teaching life skills and Project Alert, adolescent education. Okay, great, some good suggestions, great suggestions. policy advocacy, youth education, public smoking awareness, lock boxes for safe storage. Okay, so all these implementation strategies, great. There's a lot out there, and what some things we're working on, or where we're at now, is in a phase of working more with healthcare providers on raising their awareness about the cannabis use disorder screening tool, letting them know what's happening with increased access and availability, talking about what's going on with moms and women, and this whole idea that we need to be screening everyone, doing universal screening. And that's important in our community because of our local conditions. So we put together a very brief handout that is not all inclusive. And again, this is just a framework for organizing as you begin to think about what you can do for implementation strategies in your community. And this is kind of organized by the social ecology model, going from what you do at the individual level, like the youth education piece, and then all the way up to the policy level. And we've got, you know, community and kind of the higher level, the community and the higher public policy kind of lumped in one, because depending on your state, some of this stuff could either be things that people could do at the municipal and community level, or it might all be kind of state or higher level dictated depending on where you are. But again, these are just a few options for you, and depending on where you are with legalization in your state and what your different local conditions are and populations of concern, that will help you to decide where you can focus your implementation efforts. And, you know, we tend to do what can we get the biggest bang for our buck with the fewest amount of resources, and trying to ensure that there's a mix of, that there are multiple strategies occurring at multiple levels for the greatest potential for benefit. And the biggest thing about all of this is matching these implementation strategies to the community readiness in your community. So there are so many guidebooks out there for doing a community readiness assessment or understanding more about community readiness. But really the takeaway with that is that you want to be sure that your interventions are challenging enough so that you're going to move your community forward, but they're not so far away from what your community is ready to do that they just kind of opt out and they're like, I don't know what they're talking about. I don't even see why there's a problem here. And there's no space, you know, there's no daylight between us. So if you, to maximize your chances of success, kind of look to this model and say, where's my community at? Where do I need, you know, where can I kind of dig in and move them along in their continuum of readiness? So we're going to wrap it up. Jamie's going to wrap it up quickly, and we're going to head into a few minutes of questions.
Yeah, thank you. So we're not going to talk too much about evaluation. I know that a lot of, at least in our case, most of the evaluation, the official evaluation efforts are taken care of at the state level. So we rarely receive any funding to work on evaluation. But what you want to be sure of is really figuring out through like kind of informal looks at your program or your process, figure out if your strategies are working or if they're not working. And if they are, keep going. And if they're not, then you might want to change course. All right, next slide. And this is kind of back to our Adelanto, California, like at the beginning where we started with you today. Robin and I call this hugging tumbleweeds. A lot of this work to us is like hugging tumbleweeds. So it's something you want to do, except you know you're going to get stuck in the process. And it's going to hurt a little bit. It's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have to do some hard things. You're going to have some hard conversations. But the point of all of this is that in order to have confident conversations, you want to be able to do that, because that's the glue that holds all of the work together. And so some additional tips and tricks are to tap into your support systems. We talked about that a little bit today. We remember that you don't have to have all the answers. We talked about that a little bit today. Use everything that you have available at your disposal. And if it doesn't go your own, your way, which has happened to us plenty of times, we're still here. And you learn from your mistakes and you move on and you try something different. Just keep understanding that you are making a difference and your work really does matter. Okay, next slide. Also remember that people are naturally resistant to persuasion. They will put up a barrier when you approach them with something that is, new or is contradictory to how they feel inside or what they believe. And Philip talked about this in the chat earlier. Instead of trying to persuade people, a better tactic is to try to interest them and to engage them. We want people to feel safe, which will allow them to consider viewpoints they might not have already considered, or viewpoints that they might naturally be resistant to. So these are meerkats, Robin's meerkats, and they're like a real animal, and I think they're really cute. All right, here are our photo credits. And we're gonna look at that right on time. That's us. That's how you can find us. You can email us. You can email us.
You can email us.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much, Jamie and Robin. That was great.